Hello and welcome back to the StatsBomb Football Podcast. It is August 22nd and it's almost football season. Our long national nightmare is over. Week 0 is almost upon us. I am joined by Matt Edwards. How you doing, Matt?
I'm great. Excited to be here. Excited to get this thing rolling again.
Oh, man, can't believe it. And Shane Regel. Shane, welcome back.
The Pirates are officially, well, not officially, but pretty much out of the playoff race, so it definitely is football season.
I was going to say, bringing up the Pirates. This is a football podcast. Come on.
No, I think it's an annual tradition of when the Pirates and the Reds are out of the playoffs. We know that the college football season is upon us, so we can officially begin. I am Tanner Highlen, excited to be back with you guys and getting the StatsBomb Football Podcast episode of our college season preview off and running. It is good to be back on with you guys. I think first and foremost, I want to make sure we cover this. Obviously, week 0 is, as I said, almost upon us. We're going to cover a couple of games this week. We're not going to go down the rabbit hole every week, guys, of which game and who we think is going to come out on top. We just don't have time for that. But of course, I do want to cover the matchups this weekend because it is week 0 and there are only 4 of them. Some exciting games that a few of our colleagues are actually be going to, depending on where they are, but a couple of them in Dublin, actually, the Florida State Georgia Tech game. How are we feeling heading into week 0, Matt?
Yeah, I feel great. The Dublin game has sort of replaced the kickoff classic from yesteryear as the official kickoff to the college football season. And it's always interesting to have a conference matchup so early in the season for both Florida State and Georgia Tech. And it creates a much different kind of feel to a conference game than, if you're opening up with an FCS opponent where it's almost like a warm-up game. This is like jump into the deep end of the pool and let's get going. So excited to see how that turns out.
Yeah, I think when we were playing, it was always, those first 3 games kind of taken more as a warm up. You got to play an FCS opponent or somebody from, a different conference that wasn't necessarily ranked, a good opportunity to, I guess, as you put it, warm up. But it is a different world now since rankings matter from week 1 now to get into the college football playoff.
Yeah, this is going to be huge. A lot of people think Florida State has a good chance to win the ACC and potentially compete for a playoff appearance. And so, for them, it's going to be a good test to see how DJU fits in and what they're going to do to replace a couple of their defensive players that left. Jared Verse leaving, I think, leaves a big hole in their defense, but Patrick Payton should be a good replacement. He had a really good season last year, and in fact is the number 6 returner in our get off distance metric. And so it's going to be one of the top edge defenders to watch this season. And so I'm excited to see that.
That's a very cool stat. That's a very cool stat to be able to pull out. I think something that we can absolutely look for in week 0 is I think everybody will be glued to their TVs. Now, Shane, I know you're glued to the Delaware-Hawaii situation because of their plane situation more than anything at this point, right?
Yeah, I've been following the storyline of the bus not showing up on time for the Delaware team, and it's been fun to see the Twitter reaction to that. I wasn't going to tune in originally, but now that this happened, it almost makes me want to tune in more.
Have we figured out, have they got at least the first team offense and defense out of Delaware? Have they at least left the West Coast? Have we got them to California? What's going on now?
Honestly, I think it's up in the air still. I have not seen who or what. I don't know what equipment's made it. It'll be fun to just tune in and see what the sideline looks like.
Now, are they? You've both been over there, Matt. I know you've spent some time over there. Are they playing? Hawaii's got a new stadium. Is that correct? Or are they still redoing the Hawaii football stadium?
I believe the stadium is still under construction, so they're playing in that small
That's right.
complex over there. The stadium, it was necessary. I know it's taken a long time, and fans of Hawaii are probably upset that it has taken this long, but the old Aloha Stadium was in really bad shape. So excited for them that they get a newer stadium, but even if it's taken a while.
Yeah. Very cool for them. And of course, our other two games, Montana State against New Mexico. Matt, I know your old boss starting up his first season at New Mexico.
Yeah, old boss and a bunch of old coworkers, teammates. So I will definitely be tuned in to the New Mexico game. Excited to see for them how they introduce a bunch of new transfers. Not quite as high profile as what Colorado has done, but they only returned 2 offensive starters, and I think have brought in 40 transfer players. And
wow.
So kind of in the new age of college football, how quickly can a brand new staff integrate their schemes with brand new players across the board, not just new players at the university, but new players from elsewhere that have transferred in as well. And so they're going to be another one of those teams that we can look at to see how well these coaches are able to implement everything with a brand new situation. Like we used to give coaches a year 0, we might have to give people like a year -1 and see how far back we can go, because everything's brand new.
I want to get into to all the new coaches, and I've got a couple of pieces that I want to dig into in terms of new coaches, new staffs. There have been a number of changes, as there always are, but I think that mixed with a few of the conference realignment pieces we'll be able to dig into a little bit later on. And then, of course, SMU against Nevada. Shane, you pointed out SMU's first game in the ACC. I'd love your takeaways on that game.
Yeah, first game. I'll have some thoughts probably later when we talk about some of those teams and how they fare in their new conferences. Obviously, this game against Nevada, we probably should expect SMU to handle business here, but I do have some thoughts on them for the rest of the season.
Yeah, and Matt, you mentioned Preston Stone on that game.
Yeah, Preston is a really great quarterback for them, and excited to see how his level of play jumps up when they go to brand new competition. In the years past, he is somebody that might have or probably would have jumped up a level, as they were Group of 5 previously, had a great season, has really good projection going forward. He's somebody that could have jumped up from a SMU to a Power 4 program, but now with him jumping to the ACC, he doesn't have to leave. He can stay with his current staff. The head coach has run really successful offense, Rhett Lashley, and so excited to see that pairing as SMU has kind of been a really good destination for transfer people, kids coming out of the state of Texas and going elsewhere, and then maybe wanting to transfer a little bit closer to home and finding a place in Dallas. They've had a lot of success recently with that as well, and so I think that they are an interesting team to watch going forward in the ACC. As ACC loses a couple of good teams potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll see if SMU can pony up as they step into the ACC. I think, on a week-to-week basis, as I mentioned, we're not going to cover every single matchup, folks. But obviously this week with just 4 games, I think we can solidly call Florida State versus Georgia Tech our game of the week.
I think so. Conference on conference, Power 4, game across in Ireland. So I think so.
Yeah, I think that chance to play in Ireland is very cool. Obviously, my Northwestern Wildcats, that first game in Ireland a couple of years ago, the only game they won that season, actually, as they didn't win a game on U.S. soil that year. But that's the past, and we can move forward. And thinking of moving forward, I wanted to think about and dig in with you guys on conference realignments. I think there's been plenty of conversation about this. There's so many conversations going about TV rights deals. We don't need to dig into these pieces, but I'd love your opinions on the realignments and what this is going to mean on a conference by conference or team by team and play style difference. We don't need to dig into how far Cal's going to travel this year. We all know it's a huge distance, and it's a really cool visual to throw up there with talking heads. But let's talk about playing style and where data comes into this, because I think as we think about the evolution of the ACC with teams coming from a number of different places and integrating into that league, obviously the play within the league is going to have to change, or perhaps not. But I'd love, Matt, your thoughts. where do these teams go? What is it that they're going to have to change about their identity to join the ACC?
Something that I didn't really realize as I played at BYU, that's where I started my coaching career. When we were independent, we were playing a vastly different schedule every year. So we would have very little in kind of quote institutional knowledge about our opponents year over year. We would play our rival Utah every year, but that changing of not having, we know this coaching staff really well, or we've played against this particular player a couple of years, that is actually really challenging. And when eventually I made it to a team that was in a conference at the University of Virginia, you start to have a kind of baseline of, okay, we played against Duke a couple of years in a row. You understand these coaches. You're able to say, all right, well, we tried this and this last year. It didn't work out. It's a much different preparation than when you're having to prep for all new opponents. And so I think, almost more than the travel, I think having a set of 8 or 9 brand new opponents from your conference games is extremely challenging for those new teams. And so for those teams that are currently in the ACC, and they'll obviously have to prepare for a new opponent or two as maybe they play Cal and Stanford or what have you with the new teams. But it's just a very different situation than those new teams that are coming into the conference. And so that, for me, that's what I'm looking forward to the most, is how these teams that are joining conferences, how quickly they're able to assimilate information about their opponents. And to me, I think that's where data really can help. A lot of times when you're playing these opponents year over year, you build up kind of your own experiences, and that helps shape what you want to do. But when you don't have that, you're going to have to turn to somewhere, and you can watch all the film that you want, but there are only so many hours in a day. And so if you're able to, whether it's start your film study with a data analysis or have that integrated into what you're doing as you're watching video, I think data is an area that these teams really need to take advantage of as they're going into new conferences.
And Shane, do you think that cuts both ways? Do you think that the teams that have been in I know right now I mentioned the ACC in specific with a couple of teams because we were digging in, and obviously the Florida State Georgia Tech game, but as we think about the ACC in specific, do you think that teams that are in the league currently, in the conference currently, how do you think they're preparing for the teams that are entering their conference for the first time?
Yeah, like Matt said, obviously you don't have that familiarity with the coaching staffs and the style of play. So there's probably a little bit more time spent in the summer on scouting those teams. But the thing I think I focus more on when these teams come in is how does that change the recruiting landscape? So it opens up potentially new recruiting avenues. If a team from a different state comes in, you can tell a kid, hey, we'll play in your state, a couple times a year. And specifically, I like to look at, now that we have the transfer portal, what did those new teams do in the portal to adjust to the league that they're going into? And I mentioned SMU earlier.
Yeah,
I saw that they pulled in a couple of big bodies in the trenches in the transfer portal. I think in recognition that the day and week grind of playing, all Power 5 teams as opposed to the G5 league they were in before is something that the coaches recognize and try to address. Now, none of those bodies they brought in were starters at the P5 level, so I'm a bit skeptical on how well they'll be able to, handle the weekly grind of a tougher competition. Whereas the teams I'm kind of higher on moving, have demonstrated that they can, play in the trenches. So I'm pretty high on Oregon and Texas moving into new leagues.
Okay, that's interesting. I wanted to get your opinion there. Actually, I think it's a good kind of thought process of of those teams that are transitioning into new conferences. Shane, who do you see as kind of your top performers? Who do you see as your bottom performers, and what do you think is standing either in their way as an impediment, or what do you think is boosting them up?
Yeah, so like I said, I think Oregon and Texas, I think the whole country knows that both those teams are pretty capable of stepping in right away. They've both been in the playoffs recently and have performed well. So I think they'll be fine. I'm skeptical of SMU, like I said, because of the bodies in the trenches. Washington, I'm a little concerned for, but that's mostly just kind of a one-year thing, I think, because they lost so much talent to the NFL. They're going to have to restock. I think longer term they'll be all right, but I would think it's going to be a tougher year this year. The teams I'm interested in to see are USC and Oklahoma. They're both, I think, decent teams, but I don't know. Those are the ones I wanna watch this year.
It's interesting. You mentioned just a second ago the work and the adjustments that teams are making in the transfer portal and taking advantage of the new NIL rules. And it's interesting. You mentioned USC and you mentioned Oklahoma. I know both of those teams have put a lot of money into their internal apparatuses around capitalizing on player evaluations, really focusing on more of a professional or NFL style personnel grouping now, where they've got an office that is solely focused on evaluating those players. I think in more of a complete way there. So I tend to agree with you. They're really interesting teams that have a ton of talent, a ton of history, but it'll kind of be an interesting test for them first year at a brand new conference against a very different style of play, I think, for both of them.
And I think the interesting thing we talk about is, at the end of the day, it's about who is going to be on the field playing. Texas and Oklahoma have more, Texas and Oregon have more kind of established quarterback play, even though Oregon's is a transfer, Dylan Gabriel. He left Oklahoma probably because he was going to be replaced potentially by Jackson Arnold, who's going to be brand new starter, and USC also. Miller Moss played the bowl game, but has just been announced as the starter at USC. And so when we're talking about kind of overall team, we know from what we've seen, and I think everybody understands how important the quarterback position is. And so I feel better about those teams, Texas and Oregon, as far as quarterback play goes into coming into these new conferences as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. You both mentioned Oregon and Washington. I guess I'll spin quickly to what's nearest and dearest to my heart, the Big Ten, and we could talk about running the ball and punting the ball and playing defense in the cold. I guess the transition of these West Coast teams and into the Big Ten, I think has been an interesting prospect for a couple of years now. Now that it's finally happening, I wonder what your takes are on how they'll adjust their play style. Especially a team like Oregon that is so known from the Chip Kelly years, their speed and the speed at which they run their offense, as compared to say an Iowa. And obviously we got to talk through last season, the points total that they were going after on the offensive side, maybe a little bit more ground and pound than they're used to playing against, teams like Wisconsin or Iowa or even Penn State. What's your take on how they integrate into the Big Ten?
I think, like Shane was talking about, you look at what Oregon has done recruiting recently, and they have really beefed up, especially the defensive line and linebacker play. Oregon, even in the Chip Kelly years and continuing forward, has been a heavy run first, pass second team.
Very true. Very true.
They just have to have been so. They happen to have been so explosive. But I think Oregon especially has seen where they are in the national landscape. When Dan Lanning went up, he obviously has experience in the SEC, knows what it takes to win at the highest level, and has made a huge emphasis on recruiting those big guys. And their defensive line has quite a few really good players. Yeah. And so I still think that they fit in really well there. And you talk about Washington as like a brand new team, so it's going to be hard to project them no matter what. But UCLA, I'm worried about because they lost a bunch of really good players up front, and USC we know has struggled quite mightily over the past couple of years defensively, and so those teams I am intrigued to see the high flying USC offense, how that will compare to, like you're talking about, Iowa. Like that's going to be a big clash of cultures when those two teams play.
Yeah. No shortage of massive offensive linemen from any of those teams, of course, to be clear. Yeah, Shane, I think there was a thought there that we had discussed there the other day, but I'd love your take.
Yeah, I agree with Matt. I actually don't think Oregon's going to have to change too much. I think of those teams, they've done the best job in the trenches. We've seen NFL first-round linemen come from Oregon.
Yeah.
Powers Johnson last year at center. And they also had, I think, one of the lowest, depths of target last year. Bo Nix was getting the ball out quick, short. It wasn't like a fling the ball downfield in bad weather situation. I think they'll be, perfectly fine with what they run currently. I do agree also with Matt that USC is going to be one to watch. They've had their struggles on defense. They got a new defensive coordinator. If they're forced to play an ugly, muddy game in Iowa or Wisconsin or Minnesota, do they have the defense to hold, a team down when their offense can't score in the ways that they've been used to?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. I think the entire Big Ten, the entire rest of the Big Ten, I will say, is going to benefit a little bit from Coach Diaz's departure from Penn State's defense heading to Duke, and the dominant nature with which that defense was able to dispatch just about every opponent last year, apart from a couple there. So I think the rest of the Big Ten will continue to be open and excited to see there. I think, as we jump, Matt, and you mentioned your playing days and coaching days at BYU. I'd love your view on the Big 12. Big shifts with the departure of Oklahoma and Texas, and I think really cultural shifts there as well in the history of both of those conferences. Where do you see the Big 12 going from here?
I think the Big 12 is a really interesting case study in looking at a leader. Brett Yormark is the commissioner who really has done things kind of in a non-traditional way of opening the door for potential sponsorships of the conference and a bunch of different things. And so the Big 12 is really they're being really active and proactive in trying to figure out ways to stay relevant as kind of the SEC and Big Ten are gathering the best teams and becoming kind of the superpowers. I think the Big 12 is like, they really want to be part of that and part of the future of what college football looks like. And the thing that I am excited for the most in the Big 12 is the fact that teams probably 1 through 10 ish, there's just not that much different, and they could probably all beat each other. I think Utah and Kansas State, a lot of people feel like they're kind of the premier 2 of the conference. But the next 6, 7, 8 teams are all very similarly rated. And so I think there's going to be a potential for a lot of carnage in that conference as they beat up on each other. And so for me, that's the biggest thing that I'm looking at is, you have some these teams that are really not even kind of Big 12 stalwarts in Houston, UCF, BYU, and then you add 4 more in even. So it's like there's going to be a lot of that we talked a little bit about earlier, where you're not necessarily prepared. You don't play these teams every year. That's going to be almost everybody in that conference now. And so it has the possibility for a lot of chaos as the ACC dissolves the coastal chaos of every year. We may all have to move over to the Big 12 for our fandom for that.
Yeah, focus on the Big 4 there in the state of Texas and see what happens.
Yeah.
And Shane, I know we had talked about the Big 12 a little bit with your kind of pick coming out of the Big 12. Who are you looking at right now to win the Big 12 as a conference this year?
So, like Matt said, I think this is actually going to be the most fun conference to watch this year because the race will be so tight. It's the first time in a while where there's no dominant teams. All the other conferences, there's usually been a couple teams you can identify before the season, and they're there at the end. So it'll be fun to watch this year. But the team I have from the Big 12 is Kansas State.
Hey, K-State, you heard it here first.
I just trust that program. Even when they change coaches, they've kind of kept the same identity. And the fact that they're adding, they've always produced very good, line play there. And now that they're adding Avery Johnson, a 5-star quarterback in, I think he's going to give them a dynamic they haven't had before to go with, their traditional, solid upfront style of play.
Yeah, I think that'll be a really interesting one. I think, and the addition of both teams from Arizona, I think also will be kind of a little bit of a wild card for me. Seeing what they're able to put on film this year will be, I think, really interesting. And diving into again I think a very different style of play coming from Arizona State and what they've put on film in the last couple of years, and a lot of pass first. Matt, any takeaways there?
Yeah, I think it's just brand new conference. They just announced Sam Levitt, I believe, is going to be their starting quarterback. A pretty highly touted kid out of an area up here by me in Oregon. Didn't play much his freshman year, if at all, at Michigan State. So, Kenny Dillingham has been a offensive kind of mastermind in his young career so far. Coming from Oregon down to Arizona State. And so I think that's been kind of the emphasis there. He is definitely someone who got a year zero last season. And so I think he's finally found his quarterback that he likes. And when a really strong offensive-minded coach has that quarterback position in mind, in place, that really can be scary for opponents. And so that's something that I'm excited to see is how well those two mesh, and to see if Sam Levitt is that guy there for Kenny Dillingham.
Yeah, no, that'll be a very interesting one. I know, Matt, just before we wrap up on the Big 12, you'd mentioned, all the work that SMU had done in terms of the transfer portal. I'd love your take on the leaders in transfer portal, Colorado, and where they stand. Obviously there's been a lot of movement for Coach Prime. What's your take? What's going on in Boulder?
Is this where we mess with the algorithm and just say Travis Hunter's name 10 times? Travis Hunter, Travis Hunter, Travis Hunter.
I think that's it. This is exactly how we're going to get clicks this year.
Okay.
Now that we no longer have Seth really leading the way on his Twitter population, I think we're going to go hard on every single hashtag we can get, and I will be sharing this along with every Travis Hunter clip that I can.
No, Travis Hunter is an amazing player, and it was really interesting to watch him last year play both ways and be highly successful on both sides of the ball. At StatsBomb, we collect physical metrics for every play, every player, their speeds, their accelerations, but also their total distance traveled. And Travis Hunter, his total distance played was far and above what everybody else was from this season. And he was 90th percentile, I think in each one of his games last year where he played a full game. He was obviously injured and missed a chunk of some games, but that is potentially scary for late season fall off. And so I'm interested to see how they utilize his extremely unique skill set. Shadur Sanders has been really successful. And so if they can, figure out how to utilize Travis Hunter and maximize his abilities, they're a good team. I think they're well coached. It was fun to see the hype from the first few games and then just the hate that happened after that. And it's going to be easy to have kind of wild takes on both sides. But they have some really good players. And if they can figure out how to deploy them in a good manner, I think I'm excited for that.
Yeah, and you mentioned that coaching staff, obviously a really great coaching staff, especially on the offensive defensive lines, I think, with what they've been able to put together. Obviously, Warren Sapp joining that staff as a defensive consultant always gives not only a media boost, but I think a really great coaching point for a lot of those guys that he's going to be able to deliver. Honestly,
how wild would that be to have Deion Sanders, Warren Sapp, and just there at practice and being yelling at you, and you're just a little freshman kid thinking this is Warren Sapp, and I've seen him run through millions of pounds of human body, and he's yelling at me. But it's funny.
Yeah, I think hopefully you're only starstruck the first time when you're on your official visit, and then at practice when you're getting MF'd up and down, you're ready to take the coaching point and put it down on film.
Yeah. That's true.
I love it. Well, let's jump to our final conference of the now Power Four, the SEC. A lot of change in the SEC. First year without Nick Saban. Obviously last year didn't make the championship game, which is a big change for them overall. I'd love your takes. What's going on in the SEC? What do we expect with a couple new teams joining and a bunch of changes in a number of different programs?
Yeah, I think that for me, it's interesting to see the new teams, Texas and Oklahoma, obviously, how they're going to fit in. But then the new situation at Alabama, I mean, Kellen DeBoer's been extremely successful everywhere he's been. And for him to come into a place like Alabama will be an interesting thing to watch. The level of program there is obviously incredible. I mean, you look at Florida and their opponents this season, it's like 7
that schedule
of the top 15 or something wild. And, with Billy Napier already being on the hot seat, like that has a chance to really explode or implode on them down there. So there's so much to watch there. New coaches, new teams. You get some of the premier players as well. You get somebody like Ole Miss who's really thinking this is a chance to take advantage of the team that they have, and they went heavy in the transfer portal as well, trying to beef up some of their offensive and defensive lines. They got Princely out of Florida, who we talked about Patrick Payton earlier in the get off distance from Florida State, and Princely was rated even higher. I think he was number 4 in returning get off distance. And so somebody that's extremely explosive and can help them kind of bolster that defense to counter Lane Kiffin's offensive genius.
Yeah, I think that'll be a really interesting one, seeing as many top 10 ranked teams as are sitting in there. It's always interesting when obviously Kirby Smart brings a ton on what he's doing with consistency at Georgia right now, right? I think there's no doubt there. But do you think Kalen gets you referenced a year 0 or year -1 at Alabama? Do you think the Alabama faithful give him that, or do you think there's an immediate expectation to produce?
I don't think he gets a year 0. I think he's going to be on like a year 4. And so this is like, they're expecting greatness every year. And, I think him, obviously people understand he's not Nick Saban, but being able to take Washington to the playoff and the championship, the expectation is still really, really high there.
Yeah, I think as it should be. Shane, we talked a bunch about the SEC the other day. I'd love your take on where you think the conference is going right now with their additions, and then of course the continuation of their media rights deals continuing to expand their capabilities to add to what they're doing.
Yeah, I think Matt hit on the thing I'm most interested in, which is the schedule. I know Florida is getting all the hype now with having that gauntlet, but if you look at any of the SEC teams, you see a pretty tough schedule. I mean, Georgia's playing at Bama, at Texas this year. So I think it's going to be interesting to see come conference championship time if we start seeing a couple teams in the games with, multiple losses. We're pretty used to seeing teams go undefeated, maybe one loss and get into the conference championship. I think that's going to change in the SEC just based on how tough these schedules are.
Yeah, I think it's going to have to. I think it's a good point to kind of pivot on really quickly to, the change with the college football playoff. I guess, adding the additional spots within the playoff. What do you think that means this year? Shane, you mentioned maybe a team that is, a 1 or 2 loss team potentially getting in with some of those schedules. How do you think that plays out for the Power 4? Who do you think is in? Who do you think's out? Do you think there's a really good case to be made for a 1-loss Group of 5 team? How do you kind of level set in the first year?
It will be interesting to see how they handle the, strength of schedule argument when an SEC team has a couple losses, but their strength of schedule is way better than a different conference team that has 1 loss, maybe 0 losses. So it'll be interesting to see how the committees handle that. There's always those debates in basketball, and now we have them in football. So that'll be fun. Some teams I think that are going to benefit from this. Well, my hometown team, Penn State, is sort of everyone's number 1 of the team that keeps sitting there in that 5 to 10 range year after year and not getting in. So they should benefit a lot. I think Notre Dame's going to benefit a ton from this. I think Lane Kiffin, no matter where he coaches, he's going to benefit specifically a ton, because I don't think he's been able to build programs that can really be, top 4. but with his offense, he's always going to be, able to produce a team that I think can finish sort of around that 10 spot. So I think those teams will benefit a lot. I think, Clemson is another interesting one. They've sort of fallen back out of that sort of top 5 consistent recruiting territory that they were in for a while. So I think this benefits them as well. And the one team, I think, we're talking about Power 5, but I'm interested in the G5 race for that spot. The team I have pegged for it, I know a lot of people like Liberty. I like Memphis out of the American. I think
Memphis.
Honestly, clip that and put that on social media. That'll
that's it right there. I need Shane, give me your headshot, and Kev, our producer, get me a great new meme to start. I've got Memphis.
No, I am interested. I do have Memphis winning their conference, but I think the infrastructure, the money, everything that's going into Liberty it's going to be tough to beat for a while if you're a group of 5 program.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I do want to, before we jump into the group of 5, I do want to jump really quickly back to something that Shane mentioned. A team obviously sitting in that independent space, Notre Dame. We've talked about each of those Power 4 conferences. You mentioned Notre Dame really benefiting, starting off at A&M at Kyle Field week 1. That's a big test for them right out of the gate. They've got a couple other games that I don't know that people are necessarily paying a ton of attention to, with Northern Illinois and Purdue right after that. But they've got a couple of interesting games with Florida State. Matt, one of your coaching stops, Virginia as well. What's your take on what Notre Dame does this year, where they finish up in terms of the rankings, starting at number 7 right now? But how do you think that this plays out for them heading into a 12-team playoff?
Yeah, as an independent, they don't have the automatic berth of potentially winning a conference. They can't be one of those top 4 teams. And so I think that, Notre Dame is one of those teams that always gets a lot of love from the voters and, the people who are deciding the potential playoff seeding. And so I think really for them, their season it's going to come down to like 2 or 3 games. The Texas A&M game. If they win that game, I don't want to say that they're a lock for the playoff, but you'd mentioned a couple of other potential tricky games. But I feel like if they win that A&M game, they could probably lose 2 games, be 10-2, and still be a lock for the playoff. And so, we talk about week 0, and obviously Notre Dame doesn't have a conference game, but those conference games at the beginning of the season being a huge deal. I feel like this has a similar feel for Notre Dame for the A&M game.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's an interesting potential outcome, I think, for all of us as we look at this. Now, jumping to the group of 5, and I think everybody loves some Tuesday and Wednesday night action. Where do we see the MAC, the most consistent conference over the last 20 years, not adding or subtracting any teams? Where do we see the MAC finishing up this year?
I feel like most of the G5 conferences, similar to what Shane was saying earlier, in that a lot of these conferences have kind of a heavyweight at the top, or at least 2 or 3 teams that are potential playoff contenders. We mentioned Memphis, Liberty, I think Boise out of the Mountain West. People are talking about them, maybe App State or JMU. But I feel like the MAC they don't really have that high profile team that can really be at least from the preseason. Maybe Miami comes in and plays pretty well, or Toledo and has a good season. But I feel like from the MAC, usually they've had one of those teams, whether it's they get a really good player or 2 on, Central Michigan, or, when Roethlisberger was at Miami, or, they have one of those players that it's like, okay, now this is the team for the next 2 or 3 years, and they win 11, 12 games. I just don't see that from the MAC this season. And so I'm interested to see if they'll be even competitive for a playoff berth at the end of the year as the top G5 champion.
It's an interesting point because Miami's won 2 of the last 5 MAC championships. They won last year, and then I believe 5 years ago, and then Toledo in the championship game the last 2 years straight. Obviously, losing the game to Miami this last year, but MAC champions 2 years ago. Some consistency that's bubbling to the top, but an interesting take there, man. Shane, I guess pivoting to you as you think about the MAC, plenty of fun teams to dig into. Anything that you're particularly looking for, or do you think consistent performance throughout?
I think I'm looking at Toledo. They've traditionally been the best resourced team in the MAC. They tended to do the best recruiting wise, but they lost their quarterback Finn to Baylor, I believe he transferred to. So I'm interested to see how they restock there. He's gotten them to, like you said, the championship the last couple of years. So I think actually Miami would be my pick to win the MAC, but I'm interested to see how Toledo handles it, because the MAC's a conference where you see teams fall very quickly. Once, like Matt said, they lose that star player, there's a pretty a quick drop to the bottom of the MAC, and simultaneously there's often a quick rise to the top. It's a league that you can go either way very quickly. So I'll be interested to see how Toledo's season turns out.
Yeah. I think a close eye that we can all pay attention to midweek when we're desperately in need of some football. Jumping to a team both of you mentioned, Liberty and Conference USA. Do you think the class of that league, that conference right now, what's your take on that, Shane, to start the year?
Yeah, I think they're far and away better than everyone else. Western Michigan, or Western Kentucky, I should say, still MAC. Western Kentucky, they tend to produce some good offenses, but I don't think they have it this year. I think Liberty is just way better than everyone. The game I have circled, though, is Liberty going to Boone to play State early in the season. So, I think that's a spot to trip the Flames up in their playoff quest.
Yeah, I love a good trip to Boone. The stadium down at App State is absolutely lovely, but we can get into our stadium rankings in a different episode. I think we'll talk outdoor versus indoor stadiums, which, Shane, I know that you don't think there should be any indoor football stadiums. We can have that fight in a different conversation. Matt, thoughts on Conference USA? Agree on Liberty, but or a different thought?
Yeah, I similar. I mean, with Caden Salter returning, I feel like there's very little room for any other team. Jamie Chadwell's done a great job at Coastal, and then moving over to Liberty to just increase their money. I mean, they're spending not quite at a P4 level, but about that level. They are getting good players. Their facilities are unreal, and so I feel like, especially with Caden Salter returning, I just feel like it's going to be tough to beat them for any of those other teams.
Yeah, and Shane, you of course mentioned Western Kentucky. I think I'll shout out my favorite, Big Red, their mascot. I think probably the best mascot in Conference USA. But again, we can have that fight at a different time. Matt, your maybe former home, the Mountain West. Let's pivot back west. What's going on in the Mountain West this year? A few changes for sure, with some remnants of the Pac-12.
Yeah, the Mountain West, I feel like I feel even worse for the old WAC, who, if you look at teams that have been in the WAC, like at least half of them are now Power 4 conferences, and then the current teams, I think the WAC is now folding, but it was like they went from Arizona State, Arizona, BYU, Utah, to Grand Canyon University, and it's been a big downfall. But similar for the Mountain West, they used to have TCU, Utah, all these teams that have since moved on to bigger conferences, but they still have kind of the more traditional teams like Boise, Fresno, New Mexico that have been there for a while. I feel like it is Boise State's conference to lose. Utah State is a good program, but obviously is in a little bit of turmoil with their head coach leaving and so late in the off season. I think it was interesting with the Boise State situation, naming their starting quarterback, and it's not Malachi Nelson, who kind of, I think a lot of people anticipated the 5-star USC transfer moving to Boise to be the guy there. But even Taylon Green, who's now at Arkansas, wasn't the starter. I can't think of who Boise just announced as the starter. I can't think of his name. But even he had beaten out Taylon Green, who's a really good player and is now at Arkansas. So I feel pretty good about Boise State, and I think that they're my team to win the Mountain West. and compete for the playoff possibility.
Shane, do you differ, or do you think that Matt's right on the number here?
No, I'm with Matt on this one. I think Boise's the class of the conference, but I think this conference is interesting because of the coaching turnover. Boise's got a new coach. Wyoming's got a new coach.
Wyoming's got a brand new coach. Yep.
Fresno's got a new coach. San Diego State's got a new coach. Utah State's got a new coach. So it's a ton of turnover there. So I'll be interested to watch just how these new coaches handle this conference.
I think it's interesting. We've seen, to your point, a number of head coaching shifts in that conference. Wyoming, Jay actually keeping a number of his position coaches there. My guy Joe Tripodi on the offensive line, leading I think a really solid offensive line unit there. But a few of those others are wholesale changes, which I think we've seen year on year is tougher to do, especially at the Group of 5 level. Do you think that the consistency of maintaining a few members of the former staff helps? Do you think where a Brady Hoke retiring changes things at San Diego State? What do you think that actually ends up looking like, Matt?
Yeah, as Shane was listing teams, I started looking up other people as well, and it's almost everybody. UNLV, San Jose State, New Mexico State, or I guess New Mexico State's not in the conference, but that is really just a conference to go and I guess build up your staff there. So I'm really interested to see how that impacts things. Especially for we were talking about New Mexico a little bit earlier, but it goes for all these teams that have brand new coaches, a lot of transfers potentially, how well you're able to implement a culture and how well you're able to get everybody kind of moving in the same direction. I think will have a big impact on, not Boise necessarily, maybe not threatening up there, but kind of in that 2 to 4 range. It's going to be a lot of how quickly these coaches can, get things going in the right direction.
Yeah. And before we jump actually to the American Athletic Conference, because I want to dig in. Both of you mentioned Memphis earlier. Matt, I'd love your perspective. As a former coach, somebody who stepped into a new program, what is that like in the coaching booth, where you are taking over a program of guys that you didn't recruit, guys that you got introduced to maybe a month before spring ball. Talk me through what that's going to be like for some of those players and some of those coaches. I mean, I had a coaching shift, but what's it like from the opposite side?
I think the biggest thing is coaching often it's really all about relationships and how well you know your players, and the ability to get to know them quickly and what they need as far as motivation, what type of the individual aspect I think is really important. But then the mixture of implementing your own scheme versus what schemes have already been done. Good coaches are able to take either the structure of what has been done or kind of how it's been coached and implement their own thing at the same time. So being able to have that kind of balance of taking what's been done before and putting your own spin on things, it is a tricky balance. And so some staffs have spring balls, some staffs have been kind of after spring, and so it is interesting to see how each of those are going to be different.
Yeah, I think some big changes. Well, let's hit our last two conferences. Let's talk the American. I think you both mentioned Memphis. I'd love your thoughts on you think they're dominant, or do you think there's anybody that's challenging them in the American Conference this season?
I think I would have felt better about Tulane had Willie Fritz stayed, but I feel like at this point, to me, it's Memphis. Their continuity, their returning players. I feel like they're they have the easiest path going forward.
Gotcha. Yeah, I hear that. Shane, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I said I have them in the playoffs, so I'm sticking with them to win the conference, obviously. So
you better stick with it. Yeah.
This conference has just seen the biggest, I think, turnover from losing, their top schools to other conferences. So I think Memphis is kind of the one that stayed, but they're the teams they were competing with before. You're seeing like UCF go to the Big 12 and that's really hurt this conference overall.
Sure. Yeah. And you've got, recent coaching changes at Navy. Obviously, Matt, you and I have discussed that. And I think an interesting one is sort of a lot of the conversations that we're lucky enough to have with these programs heading into the season, a really data-based approach with the staff at Rice, a really, intelligent school, intelligent players, but intelligent coaches as well.
Yeah. We've had a couple of good conversations with teams there. And so especially from what I've noticed, if you're at one of those G5 programs, you obviously don't have the same support that you do at a Power 5 program or Power 4 program. And so data can be an area where teams can take advantage of increasing efficiency, increasing knowledge base quickly with data. And then if you're a team like Army or Navy in the American, or Army joining the American, but Navy's been there for a little bit, those teams where you not only don't have the money or you don't have the infrastructure for for Power 4, you're behind even your conference mates. And so I think data can be an example where you can kind of almost catch up without having to invest in other areas to a heavy degree.
Yeah, I think we're seeing some of the same pieces playing out at UAB as well. I think some interesting pieces that they're adding to the puzzle with the way they're approaching analysis. Before we jump quickly off of the American here, let's quickly hit which of the Owls do you think finish highest? What's your Owl ranking for the American, which I think we're going to have to hit every single season as we continue to go through the year.
Yeah, so it's Rice, Florida,
Temple,
Atlantic.
and FAU.
I am going to go with FAU. Shane, what are you?
Yeah, I'm leading FAU too. I think Temple's the clear third one there. Rice is an interesting one. They finished 7-6 last year, or 6-6. They made a bowl.
Made a bowl game, yes, they did.
But I think I'd lean Florida Atlantic.
Okay, and I think we can keep that. I think there's a team that is playing outside of their conference. It's playing every Owl-based team in the country. I'll have to find that one in the back of my brain at some point later in the episode. Last one, and of course not least, the Sun Belt. Let's talk Sun Belt. Where's the Sun Belt going to finish this season?
I would be more excited about JMU had they not lost their coach and probably 5 or 6 best players to the transfer portal.
Yep.
I feel long-term, I feel really good about them being in a really good recruiting area in the Tidewater. I just think that they are, they have beaten Virginia recently. They are challenging for that kind of, with Liberty, kind of that best other program in the state of Virginia. And so I like them. App, we already talked about a little bit with Shane as that kind of being his G5 game of the year, Liberty at App. And so I think it's really down to them too. But I'm going to pick JMU to be the Sun Belt champs this year.
Yeah, I like App. Like I said, I think they take Liberty at home in Boone. I'm interested to watch Texas State though. They were a big transfer portal team, and they really rose very quickly. With Finley at quarterback, he's moved on, and they took JMU's quarterback, if I remember right. But I think they're a team to watch that's rising.
That'll be an interesting one. I think, we've seen, another conference with some turnover, right? Marshall is actually in the second year of their new coaching staff with Coach Huff coming in, but a lot of changes he made after, their first year. I'm interested to see, any thoughts on how that changes what's going on in Marshall.
I think Marshall has the toughest time of any team in the Sun Belt, just from a recruiting perspective. Being in West Virginia, being further away from the traditional, recruiting territories that a lot of these teams hit. They get a lot of the sort of looked over players from the Atlanta, Memphis, Nashville sort of area. I think it's just tougher for Marshall to get kids in there. So they've always been a big transfer portal team. I think even going back, Randy Moss famously transferred there after stints at the D1 level. So I just think it's just a tough program to build at. So I'm a little concerned with Huff's situation there.
Yeah, I think it'll be an interesting one. What week 2 at playing in Blacksburg. That'll be, I think, a big home night game. And then in Columbus, week 3. So an interesting start to the season for the Herd across the board.
Yeah, they were able to take down Notre Dame last year, though, right? So
yeah,
they've got it in them for sure.
Absolutely, they do.
They beat
Shane.
Notre Dame, and then they beat Notre Dame, and then you look at the rest of their season, and you're like, what happened?
They were up for that one. Coach Huff got him up for that one, and I think we'll see him get the team up for a couple more of these. But I'd love to see them. I'd love to see them early in the season. You know, what a week it'd be if they upset Ohio State at the Shoe, or if they are able to beat Virginia Tech in Blacksburg. That'd be an amazing week of chaos, which I think we can all root for all the time. So Matt, hit me quickly. Well, who are your conference champions? I know you mentioned a couple of them. Matt, who are all your conference champions?
Okay, so ACC, I have Florida State, Big Ten, Oregon, Big 12. I also have K-State. Excited for Avery Johnson. I mean, he's a really dynamic player, and if he can increase his accuracy a little bit, I think they could be really scary. SEC, Georgia, the American, Memphis, CUSA, Liberty, and the MAC. I do have Miami, and I talked about Mountain West with Boise, and then Sunbelt JMU.
Now, Shane, I'm going to pivot to you, but Matt, I'm not going to let you go on that one because I did hear you say that you think Oregon is going to win the Big Ten in their first year in the Big Ten, and I've got to ask in just a second after I hear Shane's conference champions, what the hell you're thinking?
They do get Ohio State at home,
Yep.
And I think that if they can pull that off, it really sets them up nice for the rest of the season. And I just think that the talent level that they've been able to get in, I think they're going to be really good.
So, and Shane, now I'm going to have to push back. So I apologize. Matt, you're basically calling for the end of Ryan Day here.
If that happens, if they feel like that's best for their program, I do not think that it would be smart for them to fire Ryan Day. But even if they don't, win the Big Ten, or I think they'll probably fire him if they don't go to the national championship. But I feel like that would be a mistake.
Expectations are high. I agree, a mistake. I think a good coach with a really good staff behind him, especially bringing in somebody like Chip, who maybe understands Oregon at a deeper level than other offensive coordinators and the rest of the Big Ten could.
It's true.
Shane, who are your conference champions?
Yeah, so in the ACC, I actually went with Miami. I think this is the year for the U. I think they've always had the talent. I think they really have the talent this year. I like Cam Ward more than DJ at Florida State. So I think, the talent's not the issue there. It's can we get the guys lined up? Can we kneel the ball out? Those sorts of things. But I think this is the year for the U. Big Ten, I have Ohio State. I think they're just too talented and they're experienced. Big 12, Kansas State. The SEC, I went with Texas. I like the way their schedule falls better than Georgia's. So I just think getting Georgia at home helps Texas out a lot. They don't face Bama, if I remember right. So I think their schedule is just slightly more favorable than Georgia's. AAC, Memphis, Liberty in Conference USA, Miami in the MAC, Boise in Mountain West, and App in the Sun Belt.
Okay, we'll make sure to post those along with this episode so that we can show you guys head to head on the season and make sure we hit that as we head to the end of the season. Now, Matt, you mentioned Billy Napier earlier on. Is he on the hot seat for you? As we look at the year, who do you think's got the toughest road ahead as a coach? Who do you think's riding high as a coach entering the season?
Yeah, I feel like Billy Napier is kind of the easy answer there. I think I've seen a couple of first coach fired odds, and he's right at the top of all of those. It just so many things are working against him there. We've already talked about the schedule, losing some pretty good players. I think people are pretty excited about DJ Lagway. I mean, Graham Mertz also played really well. So I think they have some good players. It's just the schedule is so hard. And then as far as strongest goes, there is a really weird Matt Rule season 2 bump from each of his previous places he's been. And so I think that with Dylan Raiola, I'm excited to see him hop in as the quarterback. Excited to see where Nebraska goes. But I feel like Matt Rule is my answer there, partly just because of his history, but then also what they've been able to build so far.
You think Matt Rule season 2? It's the same as Ange Postecoglou. Season 2 bumps across the board.
Yes.
Yeah, Shane, I'll hit you with your Tottenham manager, and pose the question to you. Who do you think's got the strongest season as a head coach? Who do you think's got the most challenging?
So I kind of circled 3 for most challenging. Sam Pittman in Arkansas. They almost hired his replacement to be his OC. So Bobby Petrino there. So that seems like a very sticky situation. I'm also looking at Scott Satterfield in Cincinnati. I think that was a unusual hire to begin with, and I think things have not gone great there. And the sneaky one I'm watching is Gundy at Oklahoma State. He's been there forever. He's led them at when he was a quarterback there, but he's always, I think, if you heard rumors, he's always put his name out for other jobs, and it'll be interesting to see if they don't win. Now that Texas and Oklahoma State or Oklahoma are gone. If they can't win the Big 12 now, what does his seat look like? So I'll be watching those 3. The guy I had circled for a successful season is Brent Pry at Virginia Tech. I was high on Virginia Tech last year. I think I tweeted out something about with one of our radars saying that, I liked what he was building there, and I think he's going to have a good season in the ACC.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I think an interesting one, and we could talk about whether or not it's fair for some of those coaches to be on the hot seat as we go, and whether or not they get blasted out of their positions. Speaking of blast, let's get Matt to the Baja Blast of the week. Carry on a tradition here, and pivot right to you.
Honestly, we're like an hour, and usually this is like we start from the top, so we're gonna have a conversation about where this slots in to our.
I wanted the listeners to have to wade through content, get some expert opinions on how the season's going to go before they get the payoff of the Baja Blast of the week.
That's fair. Today's Baja Blast is last Tuesday, Baja Blast had a partnership with Stanley where they had Baja Blast branded Stanley Cups that there was like, you had to log into the app and be there within the first millisecond, and
not just the Baja Blast app, the Taco Bell app, correct?
The Taco Bell app. I wish there was a Baja Blast app. Maybe I'll make one. And I tried. I got you, Tanner, to try for me. It was a multi-pronged approach to try and get one of these. We sadly did not get one. I still am hoping that somehow this gets to Baja Blast. It's like the woman from the USA rugby team that is like a big Lego fan and then suddenly just has been sponsored by Lego and been given a bunch of stuff. I'm just manifesting this. So if somebody, a dear listener, has a Baja Blast Stanley, I would love one.
I did see, Matt, and I think I sent it to you. Somebody's selling a Baja Blast Stanley on eBay. I think they were selling it for $250. I don't know if it's already sold. I'm sure it has, with all the Baja Blast fans out there. But we can keep digging for you.
Yeah, we'll keep working for it.
I think as we see changes continuing through the rest of college football. There was a ton last year in the bowl games with sidelines and communication and tablets. What do you guys see as the biggest changes, apart from conference realignment and coaching changes that always, I think, screw things up? What do you see as the biggest changes that are coming to college football this year?
Yeah, I think that's a really overlooked change. It was discussed before the bowl games. Not every bowl game took advantage of it. It was pretty uncommon, actually, for teams to utilize it. But both the communication from sideline to quarterback in the headset, similar to what they have at the NFL, and then also introducing sideline tablets for replay of video. That's actually different than the NFL. The NFL just allows pictures. I think they get 5 screenshots per play, and these Surface tablets aren't doing any like video. But at the college level, they will have video, And this is something that we actually had at practice for the past little bit, where you could instantaneously correct things from tape for coaches on the sideline. And you could walk through like, hey, they blitzed here on second down. And in the past, it would be, hey, I saw them blitz here, but maybe another coach saw something different and a player would say something different. Now you have that ground truth of video right away to, instantly adjust pass protection schemes or how you're going to be running things. And so I'm really intrigued for how coaches are utilizing both the new technological aspects of the game with the communication directly to the quarterback and with the sideline tablets.
Yeah. Shane, anything you'd call out? I know we had talked about helmet communication a couple weeks ago, but what's kind of top of mind for you?
I'm interested to see what coaches can handle the 2-minute warning correctly. We see in the NFL a lot of coaches get put on blast on Twitter when they struggle with how to handle timeouts and the 2-minute warning. I can only imagine there'll be some angry college football fans this season when their coach, maybe hasn't prepared as well as he should have on how to handle the 2-minute warning.
Yeah, I'm sure we're going to see some 2-minute and 5-second timeouts that aren't necessary, that all of a sudden screw somebody up for that final drive.
Yeah, I mean, you look at like even in the NFL, extremely good coaches that have had the 2-minute warning for their entire careers, like Andy Reid.
Indeed.
I think that to assume that there won't be 10 of those every weekend where people are messing up 2-minute warnings, we're gonna have a lot of those. So we may have to introduce a new segment each week of like screwed up 2-minute usage of the week for the college game.
Yeah, I think that'll be an interesting trend to cover. I think there's a ton more to cover as we continue through the rest of the NCAA season. Obviously, again, week 0 kicking off here just this weekend. More pieces to talk about. I can't wait to talk to you guys about the emergence, the reporting, maybe next week of an NIT for NCAA football for all those teams that don't get an automatic bid. And we can dig deeper into where we see some of the playoff pieces, figuring out where teams land. I want to end this week with our stat of the week. Shane, I'll pivot to you quickly. Quick stat of the week for you that everybody could pay attention to heading into the 2024 college football season.
Yeah, so I was working on an article that should be on our site shortly, looking at formation and personnel usage and motion usage from the 2023 season. And the funniest thing I saw there was I looked at which teams use the most motion. So we have a motion classification model that can classify 7 different motion types. And 82% of teams last year used all 7 in open play. There was one team that was well in last that only used 4 motion types. And
okay. Hang on.
I'll let you guys guess.
Oh,
boy. Okay. Matt, I'll let you guess first because I think my guess is going to be left field.
I already saw the answer, so I'm interested in your guess, and then cannot wait for the official reveal.
Well, my opposite end of the spectrum has got to be like a Navy, right? I've got to anticipate that Navy, with the way that they run their offense, is running all 7 motions every single play. Actually, is my take, and then they're completely resetting their offensive formation. So that's my opposite end of the spectrum. I'm going to say a far more traditional. I think guess here, and I would say that it's Northwestern is not running all 7. As much as their offense has changed in last year, that they're not running all 7.
You have the conference and former division correct.
Ooh! Oh no! Who is it?
It's our old friends, the Iowa Hawkeyes. Only ran 4 different types of motion by our numbers in open play last year. Now they do have a new offensive coordinator, so that'll be a fun one to watch this season, is how many different motion types Iowa runs.
That's a great stat. That is a great stat. I guess when you're on a points quota, maybe you go back to basics with your offense and you stop running quite as many motions as we run through. Matt, any stats to wrap us up for the week?
Yeah, it's less of a stat, but interesting thing I found on our IQ platform. For every player, they have a radar for their position. And then one of our tools is a similar player tool that helps recruiting staffs and coaching staff say, this player has performed similarly to another player. So for our game of the week, Florida State versus Georgia Tech, we already talked about Patrick Payton as the number 6 returner in get off distance, but Haynes King, the Georgia Tech quarterback, was most similar to the Heisman Trophy winner, Jaden Daniels. And so I'm interested to see, there's a lot of excitement about Haynes King in the Georgia Tech offense. They've got some pretty good receivers coming back. I think their top receiver was a freshman last season. And so if they're able to get that passing game going, I think that they could be a scary kind of dark horse in the ACC. And number 3 most similar to Haynes King is potential new Ohio State quarterback, Will Howard. And so I think there's some interesting potential future for Haynes King and the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets.
Some great stats, some great insights, and we'll have to see if those pay off for Georgia Tech, their continuation of continuing to build that program, and then of course future potential Heisman picks as we go. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate all your opinions. Can't wait to dig in, and of course, happy Football Eve to everybody else out there. Join us again next week on the StatsBomb Football Podcast. Same StatsBomb channel, same StatsBomb time. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.